All right, class, so we are now going to take this aggregate demand, aggregate supply model for a little test spin. So there are a couple of problems from the back of the book that, not the back of the book, but the back of the chapter that I'd like to tackle. So the first one is going to be, let's do problem number 7. So this will be of the self-check questions. So number 7. And this problem asks us, how would a dramatic increase in the value of the stock market shift the AD curve? What effect would that shift have on the equilibrium level of GDP and the price level? So we have an increase in the value of the stock market. And the question is asking us three things. One is the AD curve. So it tells us what curve is going to shift. So, and then number 2 is GDP, and 3 is the price level. So we want to set up our aggregate demand, aggregate supply model. So again, we're going to draw out an initial equilibrium. And so when you do this, you're going to draw this is the short run aggregate supply curve. When you start off these models, you're going to draw it in such a way where the long run aggregate supply curve and the short run aggregate supply curve intersect. All right, there's going to be no cyclical unemployment. So this will be Y star, and then this will be P star. And let's put zeros there so that we know that those are initial values. And so what's going to happen to the aggregate demand curve? So the argument here is that an increase in the stock market value is going to have a couple of effects. One is it's probably going to make the people who own the stocks feel a little wealthier. So household wealth, we can safely assume households are the ones that hold stocks. So household wealth is going to increase. Right? We can also think that confidence in the economy is going to be high. So confidence, and that's for both households and businesses, is going to be high. So we can assume that C plus I is going to grow, right? And so that is going to shift the aggregate demand curve to the right, right? So we'll have a new aggregate demand curve here at the old price level, P star 0. You can see that this now is how much the economy wants to consume all the way out here, okay? But this is the short run aggregate supply curve. This is what the economy is producing from here to here. So you can see that this distance here is greater than this one here, and that's a shortage. And that's going to push, the price level up. Because again, if we have an aggregate shortage here, so this is going to be our aggregate shortage, that's going to result in P rising, okay? Until we reach this point here, where we are now higher up on the short run aggregate supply curve and we're off of the long run equilibrium. So this will be Y star 2, and we're going to be producing and consuming at a higher price level. This will be P star 2, right? And that's what this question was essentially asking us. Okay, let's see. Let's choose another problem to do as an example. Let's look at number 11, right? So now 11 is a little tricky, all right? So number 11 says, what impact would a decrease in the size of the labor force have on GDP? So labor force falls. Okay, and we want to know, all right, what happens to GDP and what happens to the price level, right? So once again, we're going to start with some initial equilibrium allocation that is consistent with long-run equilibrium. Aggregate demand curve, short-run aggregate supply, and long-run aggregate supply. P star 0 and Y star 0. Okay? So now we have to really think about this, and without any other information, we have to determine, is this going to be a long-run change or is this going to be a short-run change? All right, so now changes in the labor force, that's going to take something pretty big, like a war, like a pandemic, something that's going to have a pretty permanent impact on the economy's potential ability to produce output, right? It's not like a temporary change in the price of oil, the price of metal goes up, maybe, people temporarily want a little bit more money during Christmas, something like that. This is something, it's going to take a lot to move the labor force. So we can assume that that's going to be a change in the long-run aggregate supply curve. And remember what we said, whatever happens to the long-run aggregate supply curve, it's going to take the short-run aggregate supply curve with it. So if this is the long-run aggregate supply curve 0, we're going to have a whole new, let's make it a pretty big shift over here like that. That's a biggie. All right, LRAS 1. And we're going to move the short-run aggregate supply curve as well. All right, and so we shifted this thing over about that much. So we're going to need to move this one over about to there. All right, so let's see if I can draw it kind of parallel here. All right, so now where is our new equilibrium? Our new one is going to be here. That's what it is in the short run. Maybe I should have drawn this in a way where those lines intersect again, because what we have here is I complicated things a little bit more, but that's okay. So that's fine. So now here is our new Y star 2, and here is our P star 2. So we can see we have that scenario of stagflation we were talking about earlier on. All right, so here, and again, I should have drawn this with equilibrium kind of up here. I should have shifted that short-run aggregate supply curve a little too far. In fact, let's just assume that this is the, let me just make the change here. So this will be a little bit messy, but I think you all know what I'm trying to do here. So ignore that, and we'll put it up here like that. All right, so let's make this SRAS 1. And so output is actually over here, Y star 2. Ignore this. That's a bit messy, but I'm sorry. Let's call that P star 2. Okay. All right. So GDP is going to fall, and the price level is going to rise. Okay. And this is a situation of, this is also known as stagflation. Okay. All right. Hopefully this didn't confuse you all too much. So, all right. Let's see. What else do we have here? Let's see if I can find another question here. What is Say's law? What is Keynes' law? Those are just vocabulary words. We don't need that. Let me see. All right. How about number 48? Number 48. This one says, if households decide to save a larger portion of their income, what effect would this have on the output, employment, and the price level in the short run? What about the long run? So households decide to save a larger portion of their income. And we want to know what's going to happen to output. We want to know what's going to happen to employment. And we want to know what's going to happen to the price level. All right. And we want to know this in the short run. So all right. Okay, let's draw our, this is Y, P, aggregate demand, short run aggregate supply, and long run aggregate supply. All right. So, 0, okay. So if households are saving a greater proportion of their incomes, that means that that they're not going to be consuming as much. So we can assume that consumption is going to fall. Because how do you save, or how do you increase your savings? It's you spend less money and you put the money in the bank, all right? So aggregate demand is going to fall in the short run, right? And we end up with a surplus here. This is all the stuff that was supposed to be purchased by households, but they took their money and put it in the bank. So all this needs to go. And what's the way that these businesses are going to sell all this extra surplus? Price level has to start to fall. So that's going to fall there. P star 1, right? And Y star 1, right? So output's going to fall. Price level is going to fall. Here we see that the output here is to the left of potential. So we got a little bit of unemployment here, all right? That's a little slack right there in the labor market. So this is unemployment. Which tells us that employment is going to fall, right? Okay, the question's also asking about the long run, but I'm okay with us skipping that because that, I haven't really, the textbook really didn't talk about how we can answer that because, that's a little bit more subtle of an issue with savings. So here what we can assume is that if households are saving more of their income, that's more money that's going to be saved in banks, and that's going to put pressure on the interest rate in banks to fall. So think about the capital market, if you remember that. Capital market, we had quantity of financial capital, the price of financial capital, which was the interest rate. We had demand, and we had supply. And that gave us our initial quantity and equilibrium interest rate. Okay. Now, if people are bringing in more savings into the banking system, well, that, and I'm going to use green here for money, that's going to shift the supply curve to the right, S prime, which is going to put pressure on the interest rate to fall. All right, and the quantity of financial transactions, borrowing and lending, is going to rise. So what do we know about interest rates? What impact are they going to have on the economy's ability to produce in the long run? If you remember, I told you interest rates are like the gas pedal of the economy. So if interest rates go down, it's like we're hitting the gas. So the productive capacity of the economy is actually going to expand. All right. So while in the short run, this will actually constrict the economy, the long run decrease in interest rates as a result is actually going to have the ability to make the economy able to produce more. So what we're going to expect to see is all these curves are going to start shifting to the right because the long run aggregate supply curve is going to shift to the right. So over the long run, however, right, that is, since interest rates fall, this makes investment cheaper. So companies are going to borrow money to expand their enterprises. People might borrow a bunch of money to buy houses. All of that feeds into investment. So investment's cheaper, which implies that investment's going to rise over the long run. Which tells us that over the long run, we're going to have a couple things happen. One is long run aggregate supply is going to shift to the right. That is, since investment expands productive capacity. And we're also going to have the AD curve shifts to the right too, to symbolize the investment increase. Because again, don't forget, investment is part of aggregate demand, but investment has the ability over the long run to actually increase the productive capacity of the economy. All right, so we can expect all these curves are going to shift to the right, and we're going to have a new equilibrium out here, Y star. We can call this long run. Okay. Price level, we can't really see what's going to happen over the long run because, again, we got a situation where two curves are shifting, or two sets of curves. So, again, remember that rule. If two sets of curves are shifting, we can't tell what's going to happen to one of these. But we can definitely tell what's going to happen to the other. We know for sure that over the long run, output's going to rise. We don't know which way price level is going to go, though. That can go either way. All right. So this one's a little bit tricky. All right, if you were to get a problem like this on a test, I would for sure walk you through it in terms of breaking the problem down into separate pieces. But this is a great problem, but it's a little bit particular. Okay. Let's see. Do we have time for one more that sounds interesting here? Maybe one more. About number 45. And it says, during the spring of 2016, so spring 2016 is about 9 years ago, the Midwestern United States, which has a large agricultural base, experiences above average rainfall. So above average rainfall. Using the ADAS diagram, what is the effect on output, the price level, and employment? So I'm going to make the assumption this was a temporary change. Because it's weather, it could change the following year, especially since they told us it's the spring of 2016. They didn't say it was something like global warming is changing the permanent temperature, the permanent average temperature. All right, so we can assume that's a temporary change. Output, price level, aggregate demand, short-run aggregate supply, and long-run aggregate supply. Equilibrium price level. Equilibrium output. Okay, so above average rainfall is going to expand our ability to produce agriculture. And assume we've got a pretty big agricultural base here. That's going to make output cheaper to produce if we think of agricultural products as an input to something else. Let's say the food industry, for instance. All right, everyone has to eat. So food all of a sudden becomes cheaper, it becomes more abundant. So what we can see is that that's going to shift our short-run aggregate supply curve out to the right. All right. Like I said, long run, we're going to leave it put because I'm assuming this is a temporary change. All right. So we can have then that average prices are going to fall. And we have average or output is going to rise. All right. And then we can assume in spring of 2017, there's less than average rainfall. And this is going to go right back to where it was before. All right. And again, if we said it was a permanent change where it's not going to come back after 2016, then we're talking about a shift in the long-run aggregate supply curve and the short-run aggregate supply curve. But since I'm making this assumption that it's a temporary change, it's just going to be this short-run aggregate supply curve. All right. Okay, well, hopefully that helps clarify how we use the model. And if there's any questions, please feel free to reach out via email. And I'll end the video here. And hope this helps. All right.